All right, so welcome everyone again to our Angular Lightning Talk event. I believe this is the first time we've ever done a Lightning Talk event that was focused for Angular, so we're really excited to be doing this tonight. We have four great speakers for you tonight, but we're going to start off with Jay. So Jay, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce yourself and start your awesome talk. So thank you, Jay.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, I'm Jay. I'm the CTO of Trellis. We're a fundraising software for charities based in Canada. And today I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to share my screen. What am I going to be talking about? Rehydrating NgRx state from Angular Universal. So who doesn't know what NgRx is or Angular Universal? If you don't, please type in chat so I can give a brief overview. Or I can just do it anyway. NgRx is the state management library for Angular, and then Universal is the server-side rendering engine that's built into Angular Universal. There are other options out there, but Universal is built into it. So today, what we're going to be doing is rehydrating the state. So what is that? So what that means is we're going to be taking the state that was, reduced into the global state during the server-side render, transfer it to the client, and then instead of making the API calls over again, running all of the reducers again, dispatching all of the actions again, we'll just load that transferred state into the NgRx store in the client on essentially application bootstrap. So this means that we save all the processing, save change detection cycles, save API calls, and stuff like that. So I don't have any slides. We're just gonna kind of go through the code and talk about how it works. I've never given this before, so if anything is unclear, please type it in chat. And if I don't know answer, Michi, if you could please just be like, so and so, like something came up, that'd be great. So I'll share the link to this demo repo after the fact, but this is kind of just like a quick thing I whipped up. What's happening here is we have our NgRx store, right? So on the left-hand side, we can see that I dispatch one action if we're not in the browser. So we're currently rendering in Angular Universal. We dispatch one action if we are in the browser. So we're just doing that just so I can show you the NgRx Dev Tools so we can see what's being dispatched when. And then on the right-hand side is just an effect that loads some data from an API. That will only be called on the server, but the data that's returned from the server will be rendered in the UI once the browser takes over because it was transferred and rehydrated. So let's take a quick look at this. So this bottom part here is the NgRx store dev tools. If you've never used them before and you use NgRx, I highly suggest you download them. What it essentially does is it gives you a list of all of the actions that are dispatched. And oh, the chat's blocking me. The action was dispatched, the state at the time of that action, and then the diff of the state. So you can kind of track and walk through what's happening in your state. So this is just the mock data that the API is called, or the API is returning, right? Which is being called from the load data server action, right? Which is not being dispatched in the client. It's only being dispatched in Angular Universal. So refresh, it's there like we expect it or hope it to be anyway. So what's happening here? This browser one, it's a no-op. It doesn't actually do anything. It's just to demonstrate that an action is being dispatched. But the load data server is the one that actually queries the data on the server, and then we'll hydrate it into the store, transfer it, and then rehydrate it when the client bootstraps. So when does this happen? Where is this data from the server being rehydrated in? Well, on NgRx store init, oh, now the chat's in my way again. What we can see is it's actually there already when the store initializes because it's loaded right when the application is loaded up, right? How does this work, right? Normally you need to run through reducers, dispatch actions to be able to load data into the store, right? So what actually is happening here is we're leveraging something in NgRx called meta reducers. Meta reducers are kind of like a upper level of reducer that run on every action. And then inside you can just do either a switch case or an if or whatever. So you do some specific thing whenever an action is dispatched. So what we have for meta reducers is there's essentially one that runs in the server, which will always take the new state after data was reduced into it, save that into the browser or the transfer state service, which is built into Angular so that you can transfer state from universal to the client. And then there's a second meta reducer that's used on the client so that on the first meta reducer call, which is this init action here, we'll look at the code after so it's a little bit more clear, but on this init, what it'll do is rather than just initializing the store with your initial state defined in your app module, it'll initialize it with the initial state and then merge in the data that was transferred from the transfer service, from the server, so that you start your application up with the data that was rendered on the server. So hope that was clear. We'll kind of just walk through a little bit of the code now of how that works. So to register it, so I wrote a library for this. So we'll look at how to use the library, and then we'll look at the library itself. Make sure you have your imports. You don't actually need the effects module for this. I'm just using it so that I can actually make an API call. But the library doesn't require effects. It just requires your store module to be imported. Otherwise, there's no store. So don't use the library if you're not using store. And then below here is this import, NgRx Universal Rehydrate module. So it allows you to configure either the entire store to be transferred or slices of the store. So it's just an array of keys of slices. So currently you need to know ahead of time in your app module what ones you want transferred, but I'm actually working on a version of the library where you can do for root or for feature, so that in your feature modules, you can do for feature like you would for store module and stuff like that. So you can define your slices to be transferred at different points in your application. So it's not kind of just all defined in the app module. If it's empty, it just does the whole store like it's currently set up. So what's happening here? Take a look at this module. On the left, this is the meta reducer that we're registering. So during initialization, we determine if we're in the browser or not. This is just, if you never used it, and you've never used Universal, this is just a function that Angular provides that says, are we in the browser? Are we in the server? What platform are we on? There's different functions and there's different tokens and stuff like that that you can inject with Angular, but this will tell us if we're in Universal or if we're in the browser. So if we're in the browser, this is what I was saying. We check to see if the action that's currently being run, right? Because meta reducers run on every action that's dispatched throughout the application. If it's the init, then we reduce in the merged states of the transferred state, as well as what the initial state would be, right? Because this would be populated with the initial state that would be defined here, which I don't actually have an initial state. Oh, I do in the reducer, I guess. So this is what's loading that transferred data from the server into the store on the init action so that it doesn't need to be done later. So now our application's actually being bootstrapped with the information already loaded into the store. So change detection doesn't need to rerun, API calls don't need to be rerun, you don't need to dispatch more actions, etc. So if we're not in the browser, then what are we doing? So this is the meta reducer that's registered if we're in the browser, and there's a different one registered if we're not in the browser, which is this one. Like I said, I'm working on a new version of it. It's not super optimized right now because there is a reduce that happens on every action dispatch. So like if your application's dispatching hundreds of actions, this could get cumbersome and performance heavy, but it's what it is. I'm finding a better way to do it. So what are we doing here? We reduce in the new state. So this new state is what's actually going to be, that's the state after the action that was dispatched reduces into, right? So then, just some checks, and ignore those. Then we configured our slices of the store, then we reduce in a specific set of the stores rather than the entire store itself into the rehydration service. This is just a wrapper around Angular's transfer state service, which is what handles the transferring of stored data back and forth between Universal and the client. And then if If we didn't define stores, or there's none, it's just an empty array, then we just transfer the whole state. So that's what this example app was actually doing. Caveat here, and I have this set strict state serializability set to true. So what that means is that your state needs to be JSON stringifiable. So it needs to be serializable, right? If that's not the case, when you load it into the transfer state and try and transfer it from the server to the client, that might not work correctly because you can't serialize it, you can't transfer it. So that's a little bit of a caveat. If you're storing unserializable data in your state, then you would have to ignore that slice of the state and not try and transfer it. Yeah, that's it. I know I kind of like breezed through that. So I'm hoping some people have some questions on how it works. Anything I can go back over, talk a bit more about, expand on? I don't have the chat, so.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can either feel free to just unmute and ask directly, or you can put the question in the chat, whatever you're more comfortable with. But while we wait for questions to come in, I'd love, you just mentioned, Jay, that the data has to be serializable. For people that don't know what that means, just in case, like what does serializable mean? Like, how do you know if your data is serializable or not? And is there anything you can do to make your data serializable if it isn't?
Yeah, sure. So serializability means that it can be, what's the best way to actually define that? Turned into a string, I guess, and transferred over the wire, from server to client, or using any kind of a protocol, right? So things that aren't serializable, like a function, in JavaScript, functions are everywhere. Classes technically get compiled down into functions, right? Callbacks for all functions. Functions are not serializable. So you can't transfer a function from the server to the client, which wouldn't make sense, right? There are ways, I think there's ways to remove unserializable data. I know you can provide a custom serialize function or something like that to JSON stringify, but I've never actually used it, so I'm not actually sure. But if anybody has any suggestions about how to remove unserializable data from the data you're trying to serialize, that would be sweet, so that I can implement it into this library. Right now, the new version has a try catch there. So it's like, try and serialize this. If it doesn't work, then don't transfer anything, kind of thing. So hopefully that was clear.
Yeah, that was a great, that's a really great description. Yeah, does anyone else have any questions for Jay?
I either did a really good job of explaining it, or I did a horrible job of explaining it, and there's a million.
I think it's the first. Do you have any benchmarks of like how much faster this made the app to rehydrate rather than have to reprocess everything?
Not yet, but I've been wanting to create some. After I get the new version of the library finished up, I'm going to use this library in our production application for Trellis, and then I can try and run some benchmarks to see like how many change detection cycles we saved, and memory usage and stuff like that.
Awesome.
Yeah. So hopefully, and if anybody has any suggestions of how to benchmark, that would be sweet, because I've never actually really benchmarked an application other than clicking the record button in Chrome and then looking at what it gives me and not knowing what I'm looking at. That's the extent of my benchmarking.
Have you used the Lighthouse tab?
I have used Lighthouse, yeah. So I know that would be a good place to start. But I would like to delve a little bit deeper into kind of memory usage and CPU usage, because I want to know a bit more about how it's affecting change detection cycles.
Got it.
Because every time you dispatch an action and reduce more data into the store, you're breaking the memoization for your NgRx selectors, which means they need to rerun, which then change detection needs to rerun because you're using on push. The name of my company is Trellis. Trellis.org is the company's website.
Do you want to actually, since we have a second, do you want to talk about what Trellis does? Because I know it's really cool.
Sure. Yeah, so we're an all-in-one fundraising tool for charities and nonprofits. So we're kind of like a modern platform for fundraising. Right now, it's kind of fragmented and scattered, not a huge amount of people. Like in charities, you kind of have to use a bunch of different tools. Some of them are old. They're not like, optimized for the modern web, for user experience. They kind of just like get the job done. So we've built out all of the tools a charity needs to raise money. Donations, tickets, e-commerce functionality, silent auctions, live auctions. We just finished our live streaming integration with YouTube Live and Vimeo Live. Raffles, so we're becoming a verified gambling partner in Canada and the US so that charities can run charitable raffles. So we kind of just have all the tools all in one spot for charities to raise money and make more impact.
That's so cool.
But you yourself are a nonprofit too, is that right?
We are a for-profit. We're a social enterprise.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Our goal is to help them drive more impact, though. We're not a profit-focused company. We're an impact-focused company.
Awesome. Well, I'll give it another couple seconds just in case anyone else has any other last minute questions for Jay. All right, cool. All right, well, thank you so much, Jay. That was a great talk. And I mentioned it before, but if you're going to be at NgConf tomorrow, definitely join the lightning talk so you can see Jay's giving. It's not this talk, right? It's a different one.
Yeah, tomorrow is dynamically creating components and modules based off of observables.
This is awesome. So yes, don't miss that one.
Custom solution we built to get away from a monolithic mat stepper in our product.
Nice.
Yep.
All right, cool.
Awesome.
All right, well then thank you so much, Jay. Thank you for joining us today and giving the great talk. Our next speaker, I think we said Monica was going to go next.